The airplane touched down earlier than expected, the sun still lazily stretching over the horizon, painting the tarmac in shades of gold and crimson. He had insisted on taking the early flight back, despite the fatigue of the long business trip that had drained him of both energy and patience. The limousine ride home felt strangely silent, almost too calm, the kind of silence that made him uneasy rather than relaxed. As he approached the mansion, the sprawling gates and polished driveway gleaming under the morning light, a sense of anticipation and dread twisted in his chest. Something felt off, though he couldn't yet name it. The grand facade of his home, usually a beacon of comfort and pride, seemed ominous in the soft, early glow, as if holding a secret it was desperate to reveal. He parked the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly, heart thumping in a rhythm that matched the sound of his racing thoughts. Stepping out, the crisp morning air hit his face, a stark contrast to the sterile airplane cabin he had just left. The familiar scent of jasmine and freshly cut grass mingled with an undercurrent of tension he couldn't shake. The front doors were slightly ajar, an unusual sight in a home where every detail of security and etiquette was meticulously controlled. His instincts screamed at him to pause, to observe, to think, but the pull of curiosity, of dread mixed with obligation, pushed him forward. Each step toward the entrance echoed in the marble hallway, a hollow sound that seemed to amplify the unease in his chest. As he moved closer to the living room, voices floated through the air, a mixture of sharp words and stifled sobs, so faint yet unmistakably human, distinctly personal. The tone was cutting, malicious almost, carrying a weight that made his stomach churn. Pushing the door open just a fraction, he froze, his eyes locking on a scene that no son should ever witness in his own home. There, standing over his pregnant wife, his mother's expression twisted in scorn and superiority, words flowing from her lips like venom. His wife, pale and trembling, hugged her growing belly protectively, her lips quivering as she tried to respond without provoking further rage. The air itself seemed thick, heavy with tension, and every instinct in him screamed to step forward, to intervene, to protect. But for a brief, haunting moment, he simply watched, paralyzed, the impossible unfolding before his eyes. Memories of childhood flashed, echoes of obedience, control, and manipulation that had shaped him, and suddenly the full weight of his mother's influence struck him with a shocking clarity. Anger, disbelief, and betrayal collided in a storm of emotions, leaving him momentarily breathless. He could hear himself muttering words he had never thought he would say aloud, phrases of warning, restraint, and confrontation battling within his mind. The room, so familiar, had transformed into a battlefield, a place where power, family, and respect were clashing violently in front of him. He clenched his fists, nails biting into his palms, a grounding tactic to keep the surge of adrenaline from overtaking him. He had imagined confrontations before, yes, but never in the intimate sanctity of his own home, never directed at someone so vulnerable, someone carrying a part of him into the world. Time seemed to stretch, each second agonizing, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, watching him decide his next move. And then, with a sudden, almost imperceptible shift, his wife lifted her eyes toward him, and in that glance, a mixture of fear, pleading, and desperate hope met his gaze. It was a call to action, a silent demand for protection, and the last thread of hesitation snapped. Every fiber of his being surged with purpose. He took a decisive step forward, his presence commanding yet careful, not wanting to further intimidate or escalate. His mother turned, eyebrows raised, a smirk playing on her lips as if she expected him to be just another observer, a silent witness to her cruelty. But the fire in his eyes betrayed her expectations, a reflection of righteous fury that no amount of control or manipulation could contain. The words formed, sharp and unwavering, cutting through the tension like a blade. Questions, demands, and declarations all rolled into one forceful surge of confrontation. The living room, previously a theater of humiliation, now felt charged with possibility, the first real chance for justice, respect, and protection to assert themselves. Each movement, each carefully chosen word, was a balancing act between anger and restraint, between familial duty and moral imperative, And in this dance of confrontation, the impossible revealed itself not just in the act he had witnessed, but in the realization of his own strength and resolve. The morning sun streamed through the windows, catching in the tears of both fear and defiance on his wife's face, highlighting the fragile yet unyielding beauty of courage under pressure. And as the room hung in that suspended moment, the millionaire understood, with painful clarity, that the battle lines had been drawn not in distant lands or boardrooms, but here, in the heart of his home, where love, loyalty, and honor would face the harshest trial of all. The air in the room seemed to crackle with an electric tension, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in his chest as he stood frozen for a fraction of a second, measuring his next move. His mother's eyes narrowed, scanning his face, trying to decipher whether he was the same obedient child she had molded all these years or whether something had changed. The shift in him was subtle but unmistakable, a posture straightened, a gaze sharpened, a quiet authority emanating from every inch of his presence. His pregnant wife, still clutching her belly protectively, looked between them, her wide eyes reflecting terror, relief, and a flicker of hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in weeks. The room had become a battlefield without walls, a space where history, family, and personal dignity collided violently. For years, his mother had exerted dominance over every aspect of their lives, her sharp tongue carving scars in his confidence, her manipulations twisting him into someone cautious, calculating, and always striving to appease. But now, standing in the living room he had built with sweat and ambition, he realized the power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Words were his first weapon. His voice, calm yet laced with steel, cut through the tension, asking questions that demanded answers, confronting accusations that had gone unspoken for decades, laying bare the hypocrisy that had poisoned so many family dinners, holidays, and quiet nights at home. His mother, for a moment, faltered, her carefully constructed mask of superiority slipping, revealing the raw panic and disbelief that came with realizing her control was no longer absolute. She had underestimated the depth of his love, his resolve, and the protective instinct that now surged with the intensity of a storm. The pregnant wife's hand trembled as she reached out to touch his arm, a silent plea that he not only intervene, but to do so with measured strength, ensuring the confrontation didn't spiral into chaos. Every fiber of his being screamed to act, to physically shield, to verbally dismantle the cruelty. But he knew that true victory required more than raw emotion. It required strategy, clarity, and a demonstration of boundaries that could not be crossed again. His mother's voice rose, sharp and cutting, each word a lash meant to wound, to provoke fear and compliance. Yet he did not flinch. He answered firmly, drawing lines in the air, in the conversation, in the very atmosphere of the room, making it clear that humiliation, control, and domination would no longer be tolerated. The pregnant wife's eyes shone with tears, but this time they were not only tears of fear. They were the first hints of relief, of trust, of a fragile hope that justice and protection could coexist in the same moment. The mansion, once a stage for silent suffering, seemed to hold its breath as dialogue, accusations, and defenses tangled and collided, each sentence a strike in an unspoken duel of wills. Memories of past slights, whispered insults, and moments of silent subjugation surfaced in his mind, fueling his resolve. Every manipulation she had attempted over the years, every subtle and not-so-subtle attempt to dominate, now collided with a force she had never anticipated. The son who had grown into a man unafraid to confront her, a husband ready to defend, a father preparing to shield the next generation from the toxicity he had endured. The tension reached a crescendo when she attempted another cutting remark, this time aiming at the unborn child, a cruel attempt to unnerve and shame. But he interrupted sharply, a single sentence slicing through the room with unrelenting clarity, a statement of boundaries so firm that even the walls seemed to absorb the words and tremble with their truth. Silence followed, thick, heavy, almost suffocating, as if the air itself were stunned by the audacity and force of his stance. His mother's eyes darted from him to his wife, realization dawning that the tides had shifted irrevocably, that the power she had wielded for decades had been challenged not with anger alone, but with the careful precision of protective love and moral authority. The pregnant wife, encouraged by his unwavering presence, lifted her voice slightly, her words trembling but gaining strength as she expressed the pain and fear she had endured, not as an accusation, but as a plea for recognition and understanding. It was a turning point. No longer was she silent. No longer was he alone in the confrontation. Together, they formed an unspoken alliance, a front of strength and dignity against years of domination and cruelty. The millionaire's mind raced as he considered the next steps, not in vengeance, but in long-term strategy, boundaries to enforce, support systems to strengthen, and safeguards to ensure that the past would not repeat itself. His mother, faced with this unexpected unity and resilience, began to stumble over her words, her authority crumbling under the weight of truth and unwavering resolve. For the first time in decades, she experienced the taste of helplessness, the unsettling realization that her son, once pliable and cautious, had transformed into a man unwilling to tolerate injustice, unwilling to let humiliation continue unchecked. Every glance between the husband and wife communicated volumes, a silent understanding that this moment, painful and tense as it was, marked the beginning of change, the reclaiming of dignity and space that had long been violated. The morning light streaming through the windows highlighted the contrast between shadow and illumination, between fear and courage, between domination and empowerment. And in that suspended moment, time itself seemed to hold still, acknowledging the profound shift that had taken place within the walls of a home that had long been a theater of control. He understood, with a clarity that was both frightening and liberating, that the real battle was not merely with his mother, but with the patterns of behavior and silence that had allowed such cruelty to flourish. The confrontation was not an end but a catalyst, a powerful turning point that demanded courage, wisdom, and persistence. And as his mother recoiled under the weight of her own misjudgment, the millionaire's resolve solidified. He would protect, he would nurture, and he would ensure that the next chapter of their lives, his wife's, his child's, his own, would be defined not by fear, humiliation, or control, but by love, respect, and unyielding moral strength. The air in the mansion felt heavier now, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were aware of the confrontation that had erupted within their pristine halls. The millionaire stood tall, every muscle in his body taut, his mind calculating every possible reaction from the woman who had once ruled the house with an iron fist. His mother, still trembling from the unexpected challenge to her authority, leaned against the grand sofa, her eyes darting nervously between him and his pregnant wife, as if searching for some familiar control that no longer existed. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint rustle of fabric and the quiet, steady breaths of his wife, who clung to him as if her life depended on the solidity of his presence. For a long moment, words seemed inadequate, powerless to convey the storm of emotion that churned within the room. Then his mother spoke, her voice low, hesitant, betraying the first signs of vulnerability she had allowed herself to show in decades. She attempted an apology, but the words were hollow, insincere, like a fragile mask desperately clinging to a crumbling facade. The millionaire did not respond immediately, his piercing gaze holding her in place, demanding more than empty phrases, demanding recognition of the pain and fear that had been inflicted upon his wife, his home, and even himself. His wife, emboldened by his unwavering stance, took a step forward, her hand resting on his arm, a gesture both comforting and resolute. Her voice, though still soft, carried the weight of months of humiliation, neglect, and suppressed anguish. She recounted the subtle cruelty, the biting words, the relentless judgment that had turned their home into a place of quiet terror. Each detail landed like a stone in the vast room, each confession forcing his mother to confront the reality she had meticulously avoided for years. The millionaire felt a surge of anger, but it was tempered by clarity and purpose. He knew that unrestrained rage would solve nothing, that it would only continue the cycle of humiliation he had vowed to end. Instead, he spoke with precision, his words a careful blend of authority and moral weight, laying bare the boundaries that could never again be crossed. He demanded acknowledgement, demanded respect, and most importantly, demanded that his mother recognize the sanctity of the life growing within his wife. The room seemed to pulse with tension, the furniture, the floors, even the air charged with the intensity of the confrontation. His mother's usual defenses faltered under the weight of their unified strength, the combination of his moral authority and his wife's emotional courage forming an unbreakable wall against her attempts at manipulation. Every attempt at argument, every defensive gesture, was met with a calm but immovable resistance, a mirror of the consequences she had never expected to face. It became clear to her that the past would no longer dictate the present, that her influence had limits, and those limits had been reached. The pregnant wife, sensing the subtle shift in power, began to speak more openly, asserting her needs, her fears, and her expectations. Her voice, once trembling with fear, now resonated with growing confidence, her words a testament to resilience and survival. And in those words, he recognized not only his wife's courage, but also the future they were building together. A future in which their child would grow free from the toxic shadows that had once loomed over his own childhood. The millionaire's mind raced with plans for enforcing this new equilibrium, strategies for protecting his family while ensuring that respect, not fear, became the foundation of their household. He envisioned conversations, rules, and firm boundaries that would leave no room for abuse, no avenue for manipulation. He realized that victory was not in punishment, but in transformation, in creating a home where love and dignity were non-negotiable. His mother, seeing the resolute determination in his eyes, finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of the change that had occurred. The fear that had once been reserved for him now shifted inward, a chilling awareness that the dynamics she had relied upon were no longer in her favor. It was an awakening, harsh and undeniable, forcing her to reckon with the consequences of decades of control and cruelty. In the background, the soft morning light shifted, casting long shadows across the marble floors, highlighting the contrasts of power and vulnerability, domination and courage. The mansion, silent witness to generations of human emotion, seemed to absorb the tension, holding it as a silent testament to transformation. And for the first time, the millionaire realized that the real challenge lay not only in confronting the past, but in nurturing a future where dignity, love, and respect could coexist without compromise. He glanced at his wife, feeling the weight of her trust, and knew that the protective force within him had crystallized into something permanent, an unyielding commitment to defend, to support, and to lead their family into a life untainted by humiliation or fear. The confrontation had reached its apex, yet the consequences were just beginning to unfold. Decisions had to be made, rules established, and boundaries enforced, not in anger alone, but in the deliberate cultivation of a home where his child could thrive. The mother, humbled and uneasy, sat in the shadow of her own misjudgment, realizing that her attempts to dominate had been met with an immovable force she could neither intimidate nor manipulate. And in that moment, the millionaire understood the duality of power, that true authority comes not from fear or control, but from unwavering integrity, moral clarity, and the courage to protect those who depend upon you. Time seemed suspended, each breath, each glance, each heartbeat magnified in significance, as the mansion bore witness to a transformation more profound than any argument or confrontation could convey. And as he finally spoke, calmly yet decisively, laying out the path forward, a sense of resolution began to settle, fragile yet undeniable, promising a future where humiliation would have no home, and where courage, respect, and love would reign supreme. The mansion was silent now, but the quiet was charged, electric, full of the weight of consequences, of unspoken realizations, and of a power shift that no one could ignore. The millionaire stood at the center of the living room, his shoulders squared, his gaze unwavering, as if the very walls had infused him with a sense of purpose beyond mere outrage. His wife, still clutching her belly, stood close, her hand resting on his arm, a symbol of unity and trust that anchored them both amidst the lingering tension. His mother sat across from them, the collapse of her authority etched into the lines of her face. She opened her mouth, hesitated, and then closed it, finally allowing silence to speak where words had failed. For decades, she had relied on fear, manipulation, and the assumption that her power was unassailable. Now, she realized with a dawning clarity that her dominance had been shattered, replaced by something she could neither intimidate nor control: moral authority combined with love and unwavering resolve. The millionaire's voice broke the quiet, calm but firm, outlining the future of the household in language that brooked no argument. He spoke of respect, boundaries, and the sanctity of their home. He spoke of protecting the life growing within his wife and of the responsibilities that came with raising a family free from humiliation or cruelty. Each word landed like a carefully placed stone, constructing an invisible barrier that his mother could not breach, no matter how much she tried to reclaim the past. She shifted in her seat, finally meeting his gaze, and in that moment, there was a flicker of something human: regret, recognition, and perhaps the first hint of humility she had ever shown. The pregnant wife, emboldened, added her voice, reinforcing his words with quiet strength. She spoke not only for herself, but for the child she carried, for the life that deserved to exist in a space of love, dignity, and safety. Her words, though soft, carried a resonance that filled the room, a declaration that fear and humiliation would no longer define their family. And slowly, the tension that had gripped the mansion began to ease. His mother lowered her head, the arrogance that had defined her for so long finally giving way to acknowledgement. She realized that the lessons of control and manipulation no longer had power here, that her son was no longer the child she could bend to her will, and that her granddaughter or grandson would never experience the shadow she had cast over his life. The millionaire felt a profound shift within himself as well, a release of decades of restrained anger, frustration, and fear. For the first time, he truly understood the meaning of standing firm, of protecting those you love, and of transforming fear into action guided by principle rather than impulse. He looked around the room, seeing the faint sunlight glint off the polished surfaces, noticing the serenity beginning to replace the tension, and realized that this confrontation, though painful, had been necessary. It had cleared the air, redefined the family dynamic, and planted the seeds of a future built on respect and love rather than obedience and intimidation. His wife smiled faintly, tears brimming in her eyes, a mixture of relief and gratitude that spoke louder than words ever could. He reached out, embracing her gently, their shared warmth a shield against the lingering remnants of fear and cruelty. And then, for the first time, he spoke directly to his mother, not with anger, not with retaliation, but with measured honesty and unwavering firmness. He explained what could no longer be tolerated, what would be expected moving forward, and what consequences would follow if boundaries were crossed again. She listened, subdued, the weight of her misjudgment pressing down upon her, yet also an understanding beginning to form that perhaps, for the first time, she could witness the strength of her own son, not in awe or fear, but in respect. The morning sun had fully risen by now, spilling light across the room, illuminating the subtle changes in posture, expression, and atmosphere. The mansion, once a stage for conflict and humiliation, now bore witness to a transformation. There was still work to be done, still moments of rebuilding trust and redefining relationships. But the most crucial step had been taken: the establishment of unbreakable boundaries, the protection of life, and the assertion that cruelty would no longer have a home. He looked once more at his wife, feeling the tiny movements of their unborn child, and a profound sense of purpose filled him. The battle had not been physical, nor had it relied on threats or intimidation. It had been fought with courage, clarity, and moral authority, and it had been won. As the day stretched on, the mansion seemed lighter, the atmosphere tinged with hope and renewal. His mother, subdued but perhaps beginning to learn, remained seated, contemplating the consequences of her actions, while he and his wife moved forward together, united in their commitment to protect, nurture, and love. And in that moment, the millionaire realized that the true power of wealth was not in material possession, but in the courage to confront injustice, the strength to protect loved ones, and the wisdom to create a home where dignity and respect reigned supreme. The impossible had been faced, humiliation confronted, and the family, though scarred, had taken its first steps toward a future defined not by fear, but by love, resilience, and unwavering moral courage.